having Medusa's head and that is the gaze, I was thinking about the connection to Pallas Athena. We always talk about the male gaze. Everyone talks about the male gaze, but I like the idea of flipping it.
Or the female rage gaze.
Oh, that's a band name. I love that.
I wish I was in that band.
I think we are.
I think that might
it's called
be our
Down to
band
Astro. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Down to Astro. I'm Chani Nicholas.
I'm Thea Anderson.
And I'm Eliza Robertson.
In this episode, we are going to talk about the goddess, Pallas Athena, because she is, drumroll please, now in the app. So Pallas Athena is both a goddess in the Greco-Roman pantheon, but she is also one of 4 asteroids in a group of asteroids that were discovered a couple hundred years ago. And they're very, very, very interesting to work with. And we wanted to give you the first of 4, and she is Pallas Athena.
So when was the first time you both encountered Pallas Athena?
I don't know the initial encounter as an astrologer because I feel like it came after I learned like the fundamentals of the planets. The next bridge was the asteroids. And then I learned that these asteroids are pretty big and some of them like Ceres like were bigger than other planets. But Pallas, once I dove into with Demetra George's book, Asteroid Goddess, and also it's a little bit in, I think, Astrology of the Authentic Self. I was like, oh, I know this archetype. And I feel like that's what we'll get really into is like the way that the archetype of this warrior goddess, of this really strategic, one of the virgin goddesses, like the way that it presents itself. And I really started to recognize it and see how it's embodied, especially like, I was like, how does Pallas show up in my chart? And we'll get into like, sort of when it's important in your chart, but it is angular for me and it's in my work life. And I feel like I always work with smart boss women. Surprise. Really knowledgeable, really strategic, such a force in the world. And like, I think that that's how Pallas, that's my introduction to Pallas. So like kind of roundabout through the archetype, just like showing itself again and again.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't remember when I first read Demetra George's Asteroid Goddesses, which is like the seminal book on these 4 asteroid goddesses. She really is the one that in so many ways, but definitely with the asteroid goddesses, really brought us into an understanding of how to work with them. She's obviously an astrologer, but also a really incredible mythologist and translator of ancient texts. And she wrote that book in the 80s. Was it in the 80s, Eliza?
I think it was 1980.
Maybe it was, yeah.
Around that, in the 80s.
Yeah, so like peak rebirth of goddess culture kind of moment, right? So in the 1980s and in the 80s, 90s really was a moment of a remembrance of the goddess. So a kind of like renaissance of the goddess, if you will. And, you know, we need to situate ourselves inside of a context, I think, just like we did with Lilith, that God is really young and like the Bible's really young and the Old Testament is really young in terms of human history and in terms of our pontificating about some greater deity. And even Pallas Athena is really young in terms of like human history and how we related to something bigger than ourselves. But she is definitely before the like one and only God dude in the sky. So when Demetra came out with that book, there were so many feminist scholars and historians and mythologists coming forth with their canon, their ideas, their research, their work, and like weaving together these incredible volumes of knowledge. So it really is like a wellspring of goddess information at that time. And I was really young, but by the time we get into like the 90s, I am a beneficiary of all of their work because as a teenager, as a young woman, I was deeply rooted inside of the knowledge of goddess culture. And again, it's in large part because of Demetra George and also people like her, feminist scholars like her, that spent years and years and years and years going into like these archives and piecing things together and bringing back what had been so obscured, kind of like our tradition of traditional astrology. So she's always in the ethers for me, I think, is like also what Thea said. It's like, it's hard to know, like, when do you encounter something that is omnipresent? Because there's Pallas Athena, and then there's these ancient iterations of her warrior goddesses. Just think of like the term warrior goddess. It relates to any. So Pallas Athena, when we're talking about her, relates to any warrior goddess from any culture, I think, when we're talking about the asteroid and astrologically speaking. I hate to keep it inside of a Greco-Roman context, although we'll dive into that as well. But it's that feeling of like rage and like that warrior energy coming through. The first time I really understood it in my chart was with Demetra George. So we were in a class. She was teaching me a lesson, like a private lesson. And we were going through the asteroids at that point. And she said something to me about the ways in which my Pallas Athena functioned. And it, you know, like everything she has ever said to me, it blew my mind. And it really helped me to understand the ways in which I think and the ways in which I consume knowledge, but the ways in which I also express what I've learned. And that was just through the temperament of the sign placement of my Pallas Athena. And then there's the house placement of my Pallas Athena, which I have come to understand more and more and more as I've aged and as I've been able to like understand it. And it really does give me relief to understand where she is, because she's very prominent in my chart. Mm-hmm. So if you're somebody that has been socialized to be nice or to be demure or to be like subtle because of your gender, and you have Pallas Athena really prominent, it can be a real balm to understand, like, you have this warrior energy that needs to come through. You got to learn how to direct it. You got to learn how to channel it. But if you have it really prominent, like I do, then there has to be an engagement with some kind of strategy, fight, or a kind of connection to what it is that needs to be protected and guarded. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that that's like, you know, I like contacted her. But like so much in astrology, there's like I meet something or I learn about something, and if I'm not ready for it, it doesn't really land. And so it takes like sometimes like 20 times of learning about something. Sometimes it just takes one time. So I think Pallas Athena, it took me some time to understand how it worked in my chart. But now that I have it, I actually think about it a lot, not just because we are releasing her on the app, but because it really has helped me to understand myself in a much deeper way, and to accept the part of me that's like, you know, a little intense.
She's a complex figure, which we'll get into, but she does contain multitudes, more than many. I mean, all goddesses.
Really? I think all goddesses do.
No, they do. They do. But yeah. I would say she's especially complicated with the ways in which she's also entangled in the patriarchy, which we'll get to. I just think she's a complex figure. But you're right. All goddesses are, by definition,
all the faces,
very complex. I think we should tell a story about how we decided to launch Pallas in the app, because we were actually originally going to release something else. And then for various astrologically informed reasons, we decided that actually this in hindsight, this was not the point to release.
Yeah. We have big ideas all the time. And then the astrology kind of kicks us in the ass or reorients us in terms of its ideas. And then we're like, oh, okay. So this was one of those moments.
So do you remember? Pivoted.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Was it a Mercury
It was around
retrograde?
the election.
We pivoted. We were going to release something else, and then we realized we actually couldn't release it like we thought we could in the way in which we thought we could. And I'm pretty sure it was a Mercury retrograde moment where we were like, wait, what were we thinking? This isn't how you do this thing.
Yeah.
And it was like a tallying calculation thing. And we were like, okay, reorient, Mercury retrograde. And then how did we come up with Pallas Athena? Whose idea was that?
It was the one that we had already started. So we had a bit of a head start.
Yeah. So it was the easiest.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Yes, but then we found later, which this was not planned by anyone, including you, I don't think, Chani, but we found later
not at all.
that Pallas Athena is exactly conjunct the ascendant in the Chani app chart. So if you haven't heard us talk about this before, everything has a chart. And so the app, the company, has a birth chart, an inception chart. And it is Pallas Athena, the asteroid, is exactly conjunct the ascendant. So of all of the asteroid goddesses, I would say Athena's is ours and we are hers.
Comes blazing forth.
I think she chose, I think we didn't have any say in it. I think she
I think she was like,
us.
Hi,
yeah,
me now.
I think if you go astronomically, I was advocating for the other goddess who's actually physically bigger, who I mentioned earlier, is Ceres. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh, it makes sense to go with the bigger rock. But it's even interesting if you feel the energy of the two, one being more nurturing and then one being like, I'm here, being Pallas, being like, I'm here, like shoving her way, as you said, to the front. It's just like, it was really weird and uncanny, but made total sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so should we get into some of the mythology?
Please.
Take us Pallas Athena?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a lot. And partly what I said before too, when I mentioned that this was one of the more complex figures, it's partly because there are so many stories that we still have about her. Some of the other goddesses like Vesta / Hestia, there actually aren't that many stories about her that we know. But with Pallas, there is an abundance and we won't get into all of them. But we'll do our best to get through the keynotes. So the origin story for Pallas that is most famous, and then if you're listening to this, you've probably heard of it, although if not, that's why we're going through it now. The origin story is that she was birthed from Zeus's head. So Zeus being the king of the gods, the top of the hierarchy in the Greek pantheon, also known as Jupiter for the Romans. And, when we talk about Jupiter, the planet, it has that affiliation with that god. So, Athena was born from his head. But what that story misses and erases is that she actually did have a mom. Her mother was Metis, who was the personification of wisdom. So the name Metis actually means wisdom and cunning. And she was considered the wisest goddess around, to the point where Jupiter actually would seek her counsel when making some of his decisions. And then in some stories took her as his first wife. However, trouble ensues when there is a prophecy saying that the firstborn daughter of Metis, so the daughter between Metis and Jupiter / Zeus, will be even wiser than her mother, and the son that will follow will be so much more powerful than his father, Zeus, that he'll overthrow him. And Zeus does not want this to come to pass. So he tricks Metis into turning herself into a fly, and then he swallows her whole. Little does he know, she's already pregnant, and she's pregnant with Athena. And she ends up within the body of Zeus. She crafts Athena her robes and her Corinthian helmet, which has this horsehair plume over top, and her shield and her spear. And Athena, as this sort of baby goddess, starts like slamming her spear and her shield together and gives Zeus this splitting headache. And it's so uncomfortable that eventually he calls upon the blacksmith god Hephaestus to crack his head open with an axe. And Athena comes out fully formed and battle ready. So that's how Athena makes her introduction into the world.
Well, I think what's so fascinating is that this is how it works, right? When you see a god consume or take in a goddess or another god or something else, I think it's a huge flag that says, oh, one culture is taking over another culture. One thing, one entity is taking over another entity. So we have to remember, again, Greco-Roman pantheon is pretty new in human evolution. And they were also, empires. So they were consuming, taking over, colonizing other peoples and other places. And so one of the great takeovers, of course, is the patriarchy. And of course, you know, when we get to Zeus and we get to these gods, and it's a pretty patriarchal pantheon, but it's telling the story. It is a huge key clue, red flag. Like, wait a minute, what does that mean? That Zeus consumes the goddess of intelligence, the goddess, the great goddess. Well, it's a story about patriarchy consuming matriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet still, he gets a big headache from doing it, which, God willing, is the least of what happens when you do that. But it's also a manufacturing of the god that gives birth, the male that gives birth, which we then see in later iterations. I'm not going to say that there's a straight line between this and Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And like, oh yeah, there might have been a woman, but she was kind of consumed by the bigger thing,
right?
Of that birth, right? Of the great father. But it's pretty, I don't know, it's like, it is a little one-to-one. And so we see, when we see something being taken over by another thing, it's never just once. It's never just like, turn the light off, turn the light on again. It's over hundreds, if not like 1,000 years that the transition happens, or a couple thousand years that the transition happens and gets codified and, you know, written down and told and retold, and then becomes a new reality. So obscene that Zeus would give birth to a daughter, barring like, you know, a more like modern kind of moment of that where obviously trans men can give birth to children. But this is not that. This is the consumption of a way of living. And we also, I think, need to remember that a lot of the groups, the villages, the tribes of people living in the southern Mediterranean places were also taken over by northern tribes, right? Like there was a lot of like smaller kind of older moments of like overtaking and colonizing and like coming in on horses, very Zeus-like, with the big, you know, like iron swords, and taking over these indigenous communities in southern Greece, or southern, what we now call Italy, or, you know, like those regions. And so even that consumption within that land itself, like not even, you know, we'll move to North Africa, but not even there. It's like there's a lot of those iterations of taking over and colonizing and capturing and consuming and repurposing and then retelling the story.
Wasn't Zeus himself born because he was also consumed by his father, Kronos? There's like this, there was also a prophecy that he would overthrow his father. So it's like, let's get some healing in the bloodline and not...
They're still fighting about that, Thea. We're still suffering because of all of that.
Like, come on.
But you know, so I love that you brought up that point, and it's very true. So Kronos, aka Saturn, like swallowed all of his children whole. There's a lot of swallowing in this, like you say, in this bloodline, including Jupiter or Zeus. But one of the stories that I read suggests that it was Metis who helped Zeus outsmart Kronos and actually be like puked out again. So again, like the wise woman comes to the rescue here, and then you know, is mercilessly swallowed whole.
And I think that's also commenting on the fact that they hadn't taken out goddesses yet, right? Like goddess really gets taken down when we get to the Old Testament and along, but there's still goddesses here. They're obviously second class deities, but they're still incredibly prominent, and Athena is incredibly worshipped, well respected, all of that. But you can see it like functioning, you know, it's like not total, but it's already entrenched in the ways people are thinking about like a hierarchy of power.
Yeah. I was just going to add that Metis is said to have been from an older lineage of gods. She was from the Titans, whereas Zeus is from the Olympians. So you actually see that like consumption and erasure of the old way. Right. And again, her representing this wise woman and him being this like all-powerful sky god. It really does, I think, illustrate exactly what you outlined, Chani, in terms of, you know, this destruction of the old ways. And in many ways the antecedent of this all-powerful, all-male god.
Yeah.
But like you said, that line is not like straightforward.
Right.
So 6,000 years, I think it was 4,000 years before that, but 6,000 years ago, that's actually when we see the first traces of the goddess Athena, according to Demetra George. So Demetra George talks about this in her book, Asteroid Goddesses. And where she shows up, this was really surprising to me when I learned it. It's actually as one of the three faces of a triple goddess from Libya, although there's a counterpart in Egypt as well, who is called Neith. She's an ancient serpent goddess. This is also where we get into that like serpent wisdom. There's a whole, I won't go there. There's a whole like history of, the feminine and serpents and ancient goddess power that I think has been reviled in the last several hundred years. But anyway, so Neith has three faces, like many triple goddesses do. And Athena / Pallas, and we'll get into the distinction between them, but they're kind of interchangeable in this metaphor. They represent the maiden face of the goddess, so like her young self. Metis is the mother, and then Medusa, who comes into the Athena story later as well, is the crone. And there will be a tension between these three figures in the stories, but I think it's important to remember and to just hold that they are three faces of one deity, at least from ancient Libya 6,000 years ago. And how it entered Greece was there were Libyan refugees. And I don't know what they were fleeing, but it's true with like the colonialism of that time, what one wonders. But they were fleeing to Crete. And so they took with them some of these stories of this ancient triple goddess. And one of the stories talks about two young warrior goddesses, Athena and Pallas, who in some of the portrayals are foster sisters, and others they're like just young friends, young companions. And they are, as young warrior goddesses do, they're playing war games, and Athena accidentally kills her friend, Pallas. And to honor her friend in her grieving process, she ends up taking Pallas's name. So she uses Pallas as what's called an epithet, which is just like a pre-name used in mythology. So she becomes Pallas Athena. And this is a way of kind of, it's funny because symbolically you can see how Athena killing Pallas, who is this Libyan warrior priestess goddess, is in some ways a severing of that matriarchal lineage. But in the fact that she honors her by taking on her name, it's like that history isn't lost. That lineage isn't lost. She's still embodied within Athena, even if it gets a little complex when the Greek playwrights start writing about Athena and her entanglement with the patriarchy becomes even clearer.
It's like how a lot of things get hidden in plain sight because we don't know what we're looking at. So it's right there, but because the knowledge of it gets erased, it's like some part of like the remains of it stay intact, but the understanding of it is disappeared.
Yes. Now, what I'll say too is Pallas, this becomes interesting when we think of some of the case studies, some of the chart examples that we'll get to a bit later. But Pallas is, it was in ancient Libya that there were that's where it is said the Amazons came from. So like these warrior goddesses, and Pallas was one of those. So again, that will just become important later on. And I just want to touch really quickly on these later stories that were told by Greek playwrights like Aeschylus and then the Roman playwright Ovid. I'll be quick, but in Aeschylus's story, he is the one who wrote I think it's a trilogy about Orestes, who's this Greek guy who kills his mother, Clytemnestra. And there are three goddesses who are charged in ancient Greece with like doing retribution and taking vengeance against wrongdoers. They're called the Furies, and they have pretty badass names. One is like, yes, indeed. And I think it's meaningful here that they are women, right? they're goddesses.
Who else is going to contain the Fury?
Indeed. Well, exactly. Like their names are literally, these are the English translations, but it's endless anger, jealous rage, and vengeful destruction. So
hello. Hi.
Not to be trifled with. And so they want Orestes' head. Like they're, he killed his mother, so off with his head. And who steps in to save him but Athena? And what she says, and this is very disappointing, but she says, "No mother gave me birth. Therefore, the father's claim and male supremacy in all things, save to give myself in marriage, wins my heart's loyalty." So basically,
she's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, well, yes, we didn't look up her chart, but we should. But yes, so basically she's saying, because a woman didn't give birth to me, I believe men are supreme, but I will not marry one because she is a virgin goddess. She's complete in herself. She doesn't actually want to marry a dude. She just kind of wants to be one in a way, or to like act in that world, to
or to benefit from the power that she receives as a gatekeeper of patriarchy.
Yes.
Through their imagination, right? This is Pallas Athena through a patriarchal imagining.
Yes. Yeah. And again, these are written by like male playwrights, 2,000 years ago. So,
you know who does a really good treatment? I don't mean to interrupt the mess, but of in the book Circe, Madam, what's her name?
Yeah,
Madeline Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And she does a really good, so it's a novel and it's about Circe from Odysseus, but told from Circe's point of view. So a witch's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And Athena is in that book. And like, when you read it, the way she's rendered, if you want like a modern understanding of it, it's like, she is vicious. She's like, she becomes the main villain in that story because she is so, against the witch, against the like a woman trying to assert her own independence. It's almost like she serves as that patriarchal hand. And I think I just wanted to give that as like a side read, because I know we talk about these old playwrights, but that's like a really fun modern day treatment of the gods, where Athena is just so strikingly severe, that almost made me want to go back and be like, is this accurate? But It's really, really good.
I love that book. And I love Circe as a goddess. So thank you for mentioning that. Last piece of myth, and this is a quick one, but it feels important. So this is an Ovid's Metamorphosis. There's a story of Medusa. And so Medusa was originally a priestess to Athena, which kind of, in my view, really underlines the betrayal here. And she was in Athena's temple, and then she is raped by Poseidon, the god of the sea. And Athena is so horrified that this act has taken place in her temple. But she doesn't blame Poseidon. She doesn't go after him. She goes after Medusa, and she curses her to turn. Medusa has, at least at first, she had the most beautiful hair in the land. And Athena curses her so her hair turns to snakes, and so that her gaze can turn people to stone. Mm-hmm. And then later, when the hero Perseus is fighting Medusa, who's now this demon Gorgon figure, Athena lends him her shield, which is so shiny that he uses it to face Medusa, and then her gaze is reflected back to her, and she turns to stone. And this is how he's able to slice her head off. And Athena ends up wearing an image of Medusa's head on her breastplate, on her aegis, I think it's pronounced. So again, the severing of this ancient part of this triple goddess, and the matriarchy, and this, representation of, in this case, femininity, but especially Medusa's like known as the crone figure. There's a separation there, but she still kind of embodies her in a way. She's literally wearing her on her shield.
So it's a secondary moment where there's this split within Pallas Athena, right? So there's first the Pallas and Athena, and then she takes her name, and then she is the one who curses and then slays her priestess, Medusa, and then takes her head as a protection. And we know that image of Medusa is a protective image. So it's like the protective eye of the goddess in a sense. And then in another sense, like a snake-haired goddess is like, yeah, of course, like every goddess was the snake. Like the snake is the goddess. If we go back.
Exactly.
back.
Yeah.
we talked about Lilith, we talked about, the snake, the owl, the tree, like that is the goddess. And so things that become reviled, like you said, snakes, and that's like thousands of years, like Judaism and the rabbis have done a pretty good severing of us from snakes, I think, in a lot of the older kind of texts. I used to fight with a rabbi that I was not fight with. I used to be like, why did they, like, what is the thing with snakes? And so we would go into the text and try to find anything else about snakes that the rabbi said was good. And it's very hard, let me tell you. And so Medusa being the one who has hair of snakes, like obviously that's terrifying, but goddesses are, what I was trying to say in the beginning is like goddesses are always these complex figures of destruction and creation, because that is the life cycle. So the goddess always has a face that is terrifying and always has a face that is nurturing. It always has the ability to destroy and always is the creatrix. And so it's always the ugly and the beautiful. It's always all of these things together because it is a complete power. And so then when we get to these, younger, if you will, myths, these things get like cut up and tried to be owned by only one. Like Venus is supposed to, Aphrodite is supposed to be only beautiful. And of course we see other sides of her. She's jealous, she's vengeful, she's all those things. But no goddess in their original form was ever just one thing. And so Medusa as snakes is like that just points to her ancient roots of goddess of transformation. But also in this new telling between Athena and Poseidon, it's also what happens when patriarchy takes over and rape culture proliferates. And we are either, we're told within that construct, we're told we either can be Athena, we can either be the gatekeeper of patriarchy and the violence therein, or we can be Medusa. That's what we're told. We can be become a monster. We can be vilified because of the violence that it's been inflicted upon us, and or completely destroyed. And so you start to see this like binary way of being that doesn't make any sense given a kind of like fuller context of being. But here we are.
Yeah. And I think integrating those aspects, integrating the monster with the innocent young woman, with the virgin, the wise woman, the virgin. That's real. That's more real.
Well, and that's
and
our job,
powerful.
Right? Our job is to understand the part of us that is Medusa, the part of us that can, with our fury and our betrayal, turn people into stone just by the kind of concentration of our expression of that. And then the part of us that is the warrior goddess, and then the part of us that will maybe be doing the patriarchy's bidding, even unconsciously, or aligning with something that isn't life-giving instead of what is. And then the healing journey that can be done through working with this Pallas Athena archetype in your chart, I think is really big. And so it's interesting because you can also, we're not covering this in this episode, but you can think of, there's this fixed star named Algol, which is said to be like the blinking eye of Medusa. And that's at about 27 degrees of Taurus now. I think it's
26 or did it move?
26.
Around then.
Around there. So if you have a planet or point around that, 26-ish degrees of Taurus, then you know that planet's also connected to the mythology of Medusa. And if you have Athena at something, interesting in your chart as well, these can be like the reoccurring themes. You can start to kind of weave these two together also, which is kind of a nice way of trying to reintegrate the parts into the whole. Because that Medusa point is very like ominous, but it's also power. It's like creative power. Because what happens when we are able to reclaim our story from the violence or the suffering that we've encountered, is that we get reconnected with our power.
I mean, I think there's so much wisdom in the myth and the telling of it at each point that Pallas or Athena did the severing, that it wasn't like she just walked away. She like integrated that part either through the name or through maintaining it for the shield. Like there is a certain type on one hand where it's like saying like cutting off and severing a certain wisdom or parts of like this whole, what made her whole. But then I think there's like, okay, then it still has like a value. Like like this is needed. It's needed on an individual level, but also like on a collective, like societal level. And then the second thing too, as we're talking about severing, like having Medusa's head, and that is the gaze. I was thinking about the connection to Pallas Athena being like the gray-eyed one, or someone who's maybe doesn't have sight, but the sight is within. Maybe that's part of her wisdom. I don't know, but like a kind of that recognizing where the gaze is and what power that has also feels like incredibly moving and inspiring as a part of Athena to lean into. It's like you can use that to like, put the gaze inside and turn it out when you need to as protection or power or whatever you need, rather than, we always talk about the male gaze. Everyone talks about the male gaze, but I like the idea of flipping it and seeing where the wisdom is, and this kind of the eye is protection.
Mm-hmm. Or the female rage gaze.
Female rage gaze? Oh, that's a band name. I love that.
Yeah, I wish I was in that band.
I think we are.
I think that might
it's called Down to Astro.
I love that, Thea, and especially as Pallas Athena, or Athena more broadly, so expertly opted out of any kind of male gaze. Like there were moments where I think she was, people tried to marry her off, and she's like, no,
right,
that's not what this is for.
Yeah.
I have bigger plans.
Right. Which is also such an important archetype to name, that it is, again, very much, very, very, very much predates anything Greco-Roman. That there are many different goddesses the world over that belong to themselves, that were whole unto themselves, even if they had husbands, or even if they had lovers, or even if they had counterparts. Many goddesses in their myths would go annually to the river, to the waters, and kind of reunite themselves with themselves, like give themselves a mikveh or baptism or whatever you want to call it, annually, to just like restore oneself, one's own energy. And so there's that aspect here that again gets broken off, right? In the Greco-Roman pantheon, there's a couple of different, what they called virgin goddesses, which means that they weren't ever coupled with a male counterpart. And so there was this youthfulness to them, or this solitariness to them, but also a wisdom to them, and also an ability to focus, because the ones that ended up with gods as husbands certainly had to deal with a lot of drama and a lot of suffering. And so these wisdom goddesses, these oftentimes, again, virgin goddesses, got to be whole into themselves and just like do their own thing. Like nobody interrupted them. And they might have been kind of like either in terms of a male gaze, they would be called like androgynous, but they might even just be a little bit more balanced and not having to be within the male gaze. Some of them definitely, like Pallas Athena, are very androgynous in nature. And there's this, they hold the place card for us to remember that no matter what relationship we are in, we have to belong to ourselves first and foremost in order to be of any use, any service, any goodness to the world. And so Pallas Athena, even though there's, these layers with her, that she's like consumed by the patriarchy and then utilized by the patriarchy, there is still this ancient understanding of belonging to oneself and fighting for the things we need to fight for.
Yeah. And I know we'll get into the astrology. Maybe this is a good segue actually to get into how Pallas Athena can show up in us today. But one thing that I've really noticed when people have a prominent Pallas Athena placement is they tend to pour themselves, like their life force, into their work, into their great work, whatever that is. And
what are you saying?
Maybe they also have a relationship. Maybe they also have kids. But I think I've noticed there can be sometimes a tension between these aspects, like our professional lives or our creative, artistic lives. It's really prominent in the charts of like activists, entrepreneurs, politicians, even lawyers, like people who have kind of all-consuming work in the world, even if they also have relationships, and some don't. Some are kind of married to their work in a way, or to their creativity, to their output, to whatever. So one thing that Demetra George says is she describes Pallas Athena as the principle of creative intelligence. So we've really talked about Athena as a warrior goddess, but she was also a creator. She was charged with creating, or not charged with, but it is said that she created the flute. I think the first earthenware vases. I'm trying to look at my notes at where I have the full list.
She's a weaver.
A weaver as well. Yes, there are a few things, like a few instruments and implements that she created. And so she is the goddess also of people who work with their hands, of like crafts people. But in any case, I think this broader theme of coupling might come second, or like kids might come second or third, or not at all. There can just be this like that libido, that life force is really pouring towards one's work in the world.
Let's talk for a moment about the astronomy of it, because this is like a whole thing about this goddess archetypal energy. And that's what we have projected onto this little rock in the sky. So there's a little rock in the sky that we name Pallas Athena. And then we come to see, is it true that the placement of that rock in the sky when you were born brings forth this archetype in you and in your life and in your work? Or when does it not? Does this actually work? So in terms of the astronomy, this little rock that we're talking about is part of what we call a little asteroid belt that's in the sky that was discovered around the time of the suffragette movement. So that's part of the reason why they were given the names of goddesses. Am I correct in saying that? Or is it just a correlation that happened?
I don't know. I mean, I love that possible synchronicity.
I think that's also from Demetra.
I think it was partly because we had already named the planets after the dudes. So they're like,
we had but there's a lot more.
So I think we were following suits of like, let's name it after another god in the Greco-Roman pantheon when Pallas was discovered in 1802. And so we just kept going with that. And it was originally thought to be a planet. But then in 1845, all of the asteroids were reclassified properly as asteroids.
But those four goddess asteroids, they were discovered first. And they're the four biggest ones.
They are.
So Pallas Athena is the third largest asteroid in the solar system after Ceres and Vesta. But the others, like there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Like there are a lot
of rocks
of asteroids.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they are much, much smaller than these four goddess asteroids.
Right.
So I don't know if there was a connection to the suffragette movement, but I like that.
It's the same time period. Yeah.
Yeah. People have made that in the discovery chart, that connection.
Right.
Astrologers. Yeah.
So they're found, or they exist. Their orbit is between Mars and Jupiter.
Yeah.
So they're not super far away, but they're not super close. Mars and Jupiter kind of denotes this line in a sense between what's really close and available to us and what starts to get further away. So they're in between that. So I think that their energy is accessible, or we could say more personal, or lands more personally. And Pallas Athena in particular has how long does it take Pallas Athena to move through a sign? Like a couple of months.
So this is the thing. It can vary so widely with the retrograde periods. Pallas Athena takes 4.6 years to circle the sun. So her orbit is 4.6 years. And if she's moving direct, the asteroid can move through a sign in like 3 months. But if she's retrograde, it takes a year. And so this was another lovely synchronicity. We're actually in our Pallas return right now for the app. And it's all year long because of the retrograde period.
Wow.
So when the app formed in 2020, Pallas Athena, the asteroid, was in Aquarius. It was the exact Pallas return when we decided to go with Pallas.
Oh my God.
And it's still in Aquarius, and it will be, I think, for the rest of the year.
Wow.
That's wild.
Amazing.
Fate.
See, asteroids do have that like uncanny, like synchronistic. How does this work? How does this happen?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't plan it that way.
So there's two ways to look at it. Sometimes the sign that it's in will be very personal to you if it's moving at a clip. And then for others of us, we'll be born within the retrograde period, and everybody within a 12-month span, give or take, will have the same Pallas Athena kind of like sign as us. So it is and it isn't. It kind of like goes back and forth. It's kind of like Jupiter, and then it's kind of like Mars in terms of its pace.
Exactly.
Okay, so we wanted to look at some charts as examples and see if you think that this resonates.
Okay, so last night I did a deep dive on Amelia Earhart on the internet because I found her chart. So we're looking at her birth chart right now, and it's a AA Rodin rating chart, which means you can trust that time. And so she was born with the asteroid Pallas Athena exactly conjunct the ascendant. So they're both at 3 degrees of Taurus, which is really stunning. And I thought this would be like a good case study to like go a little bit deep into to see how that popped up throughout the life. In terms of who Amelia Earhart was, so she was a pilot. She was one of the first women pilots who came to fame in the like 1920s and 1930s. So aviation is still incredibly new. People don't even know if planes are going to get in the air. There's like the advent of trying to be able to navigate through non-visual instruments. And at the same time, Amelia Earhart is learning like, is really interested and proves herself over and over again with like flying with a bunch of male pilots, that she's an incredible resource, that she's like she's incredibly ambitious from the get. So that's like already she's kind of pushing her way forward. She's like compiling a team. She wants to get in there and in the cockpit, in the pilot, and be able to like navigate all these planes. She becomes, she does the first transatlantic flight as a woman. And she, to cut to the end of her life, she did die trying to circumvent, travel around the globe, and she disappeared in the 1930s. And
oh my God.
Yeah, it was really intense. But if you put yourself in like the 1920s, like Amelia Earhart, she was huge. She's like hobnobbing with presidents, and she's like a media sensation. Like people cannot get enough of her because she is so, she's doing this thing that no one has ever done before, which is like be a female pilot and go in all these distances. Growing up, she had a sister, and they were like really rambunctious. And I was really thinking about like the whole Pallas and Athena. They would do things like the Earhart children seemed to have a spirit of adventure and would set off daily to explore their neighborhood. They would climb trees, hunt rats with a rifle, sled downhill. They described her as a quote tomboy because she liked to play in the dirt and outside. And so she also like in her childhood fashioned like a homemade ramp that was basically a homemade roller coaster, and secured it to the roof of a family tool shed. And that was her first quote flight. So she was like incredibly not afraid to get hurt, incredibly rambunctious, just like, and like really in this kind of mode with her sister. And I thought that was like really cute, is that sort of like Pallas and Athena archetype together. Her sister was like a real big inspiration to her. But also too, what I learned about her biography is that as she was like, she tried to apply to MIT, but she didn't have the money. She was incredibly smart. She was like trying to get her education, but then like, I don't know, her dad was an alcoholic. So there was like all these things that would happen where she would get derailed, but she kept persevering. And one of the obstacles for her was that she had this splitting headache.
Oh my God.
She had sinusitis. And so she had like 3 to 4 operations. They actually like prevented her sometimes from flying because of the pressure. And a lot of the operations were like incredibly unsuccessful, and they were incredibly painful. And so I was like, what a badass. She's like suffering with all this pain, and she's like, I'm going to thrust myself into the air. And it it was that kind of, Eliza, what you were saying earlier about like Zeus swallowing her and her causing this huge headache. And with Pallas on the ascendant, and the ascendant representing the body or the head, it's kind of like giving that sort of signification really powerfully.
Also, she wore a helmet.
She wore a helmet.
Like you think Amelia Earhart, you think helmet.
Yes.
Now, I don't know what the helmet was going to do if the plane crashed, but you know what I'm saying? Like that is right there. And what kind of like warrior energy did you have to muster as the first female pilot, as a woman in that moment that wants to be a scientist, right? Aviators are part scientist, at least.
Yeah. She's incredible. She's brilliant.
Mechanics of weather. Yeah. So like how much do you have to push? I mean, she was a white woman, so made that was, you know, a lot was made easier because of that, but still she's functioning within patriarchy and then pushing the whole industry of aviation and the whole science of aviation forward through her brilliance.
And she was like a good media queen, which that feels like,
well, look at all that. We have to say, like, there's so much Gemini in this chart. The ruler of her is, but that Gemini, but like,
I was like, oh, I see you. The other thing I do want to say in terms of partnership. So listen, she got married after this dude. He was like I think he was like a big publisher, eventually a Hollywood person, producer, but she didn't want to marry him. He proposed like 6 times. I think this is going to the like virginal goddess thing. And finally she said yes, but it was definitely, they say, a marriage of convenience. Okay.
Yeah. Gay.
Yeah, I don't think she was into him. She said, I want you to understand I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you similarly. I may have to keep some place where I can go to be by myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all times the confinement of even an attractive cage.
Wow.
Mic drop.
Love.
Damn.
Love this.
So I love that she did the marriage, but not really. She was just like, let's just get money together.
I belong to myself and I'll
fund my trips
home. Maybe. Yeah. Oh my God.
That is
hilarious.
A stunning example, Thea. I love that.
Yeah.
And I just want to flag too, the ascendant. We've talked about the helmet. Mm-hmm. The ascendant can be, it can be how we look to the world or how we come off to the world. Mm-hmm. And, or, you know, our physical body. And something I've noticed, we talked about, androgynousness being a feature of Pallas Athena. I've also in client readings have noticed with prominent Pallas Athena placements, I've had clients who are either non-binary or gender non-conforming in some way. So like just not really adhering to any
gender roles or
traditional gender roles signals, in a binary setup anyway. But I think, I mean, obviously, you know, we didn't have words like non-binary per se we didn't at least have the language for that in the early 1900s. But I do think Amelia Earhart, like we kind of talked about a little on our prep call the other day.
Is deeply handsome.
Yes.
Totally.
And, you know, androgynous, like just not necessarily a girly girl. Well, you mentioned the tomboy feature.
Yeah, that was the only word they had back then. So.
I also just want to say 2 things that are a little unrelated, but we've done it on other episodes. So I just want to like weave something together is that, okay, she goes missing, the ruler of her ascendant, along with like a whole compilation of things in Gemini. So we're talking about the flight queen, the one who takes flight, like having so much in Gemini. The ruler of her ascendant's in Gemini is sitting with Neptune, which is a planet of getting lost and going missing and like a fog rolling in and nobody ever knowing what happened. So that's wild. And then also she was born with the sun really close to the south node and the moon about to meet the sun. So she's born right before an eclipse. So she has that kind of temperament of eclipsiness, which usually brings about a type of like exciting, you know, life, but also the light can go off and on. There's like can be like a flickering nature to one's mission, one's, you know, way of going. Anyways, I just wanted to mention those 2 things.
This chart is such a fun case study.
I know. And that we have a AA rating for it is wild.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I don't know how. Yeah.
Okay. So Audre Lorde, this is I believe an A-rated chart. So not AA, but still not bad. And Audre Lorde has Pallas Athena within a 1-degree conjunction of Mercury. So Mercury, we know, is the planet of communication, of learning, of ideas, of thought in general, language. And who was Audre Lorde but a poet, in addition to being an activist and a philosopher, a thinker. And she would use her poetry as a way to fight against injustice and as like, you know, a weapon of sorts in the civil rights movement, I would say. But it's so when
and
you
gay
dig
liberation
into her,
and, yeah.
Yes. When you dig into her her deeper history, it's just like it's even more profound how this comes online as well. So if we just look away from Pallas for a moment, Mercury on its own in Pisces is a little challenged because it's in its sign of both fall and detriment.
Mm-hmm.
Pisces is a challenging place for the messenger to be. It's in the 6th house, which is one of the houses that's also considered more challenging in traditional astrology. And it's sharing a sign with Mars, which is one of the malefic planets. So there are some challenges to overcome here. And Audre Lorde actually didn't learn to speak until she was 4 or 5 years old. So there is, when it comes to child development, that is a little delayed. But then she learned to do everything all at once. She learned to write at the same time that she learned to speak. She learned to read at the same time. And there are quotes of her saying that like she thinks in poetry, like she wasn't thinking in a necessarily a linear way that maybe early school teachers kind of understood, but she was thinking in poetry, and like poetry was a way that she could make sense of the world. And there are also some really just some great quotes that I think like mirror this or reflect this signature so strongly. So first of all, she's self-described as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. So literally describing herself as a warrior and as a poet. Of course, she was a poet, but anyway, she's acknowledging, I think, that warrior aspect of her. She has a quote about learning. She says, "The learning process is something you can incite, literally incite, like a riot." So again, there's something there about like learning and the acquisition of ideas, or just like developing one's mind, which is very mercurial, as being a way of sharpening your sword somehow, or like that battle queen persona does seem interwoven into her ability to think, into the ideas she brought forth and made so well known, and into her poetry, her words that we still, you know, they still have such a profound impact on us today, and like a legacy today that really feels so clear in this like coupling of Mercury and Pallas and Pisces. What I'll add too, so Audre Lorde ended up passing away from cancer, and she wrote a lot about that in the Cancer Journal. So this is Pallas and Mercury in the 6th house, which is the place of it can be the place of sickness, but also of health. So I just thought it was interesting that even beyond using her words as an activist and as a poet in its for poetry in its own right, I think one might wonder if she was using them as a sort of a self-therapeutic mechanism as well. I don't want to assume that, but we do know she at least wrote about her illness, so that feels relevant to the house placement too.
And she was famous for saying things like, "Your silence will not protect you."
Yes, for sure.
Right. And so like was really forthright about American empire and about the violence it was wreaking. She was really aware of the strategy of American imperialism and the impact of it. And so much so that everything we find ourselves in today is directly related to everything she was talking about 40, 50 years ago. I do want to say one interesting thing about Mercury in Pisces is that Maya Angelou also had Mercury in Pisces, and she also didn't speak for different reasons, but she didn't speak until she was 8 years old.
So traditionally Mercury in the water signs was considered to be a mute placement. I'm using air quotes here. But I have Mercury in Scorpio, and I went through a period of not speaking in school. So that connects.
Moments of deep reflection, I would say, are necessary for Mercury water placements. You don't always have to talk.
But they're still communing.
And then you might be like Eliza and write millions of books
later.
But like also like poetry as political, like poetry that moves the world to a new point, with that Mercury Pallas point. So it's like it's still taking this is a like it's with Pallas and the signs, it's still taking that, it's picking up on that environment of Pisces, but you still trying to do the thing and archetypally. And it's so fascinating to see how that plays out in all the charts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to read a couple other of her quotes. I write because I am a warrior and my poetry is my primary weapon.
Hello.
I love that. Oh my gosh. That was the quote I was looking for and did not find. Thank you for finding it.
Okay, so I already said I am deliberate. Did I say I am deliberate and afraid of nothing?
No, you didn't say that.
When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. Let's all tattoo that. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Nina Simone's chart. So Nina Simone's chart is a kind of epic example of what happens when you have the ruler of the sign co-present. So Nina Simone has an Aquarius rising. In traditional astrology, Saturn becomes the ruler of Nina Simone's ascendant. Saturn is in its own sign. It's in Aquarius, and Pallas Athena is right there. So Nina Simone has Pallas Athena 1 degree away from the ruler of her ascendant. Just to remind us, the ruler of our ascendant is the planet that steers the direction of our life. It steers our life's mission. So both the planet itself and what the planet does, or the impact that it has, or the archetype that it is, becomes exceptionally important for our life's mission. So when you're an Aquarius rising or Capricorn rising, you're steered by Saturn. And Saturn is austere. Saturn definitely speaks to moments of isolation. Saturn speaks to a type of self-mastery. Saturn speaks to being able to do something for long periods of time that will eventually amount to something quite fantastic, usually, if we do it consistently. But remember, the main factor of Saturn is that it's slow moving and that there is a type of melancholy or like an isolation that's often connected to it. And when in Aquarius, it's very much about the mind. Aquarius is an air sign. And, you know, if Aquarius is high functioning, or when it is high functioning, it is a sign of, I equate to somewhat of genius. Just kind of like we were talking about Amelia Earhart, and she had all that Gemini, like the thinking mechanism goes on kind of overdrive. So the thing about Nina Simone is that she was a child prodigy. She was a genius. By 6 months old, she was able to recognize the notes on sheet music. It terrified her mother, like spooked her mother. And then by 3 years old, some accounts say 2.5, other accounts say 3 years old, she was able to play pitch, note perfect, everything perfect, a song on the piano that she had heard in church. And she played it in the key of F, which she didn't know at that time. So she was like genius beyond genius, child prodigy. Somebody saw she played then she started to play at church as a very, very young child, play piano. And somebody in the audience, a white woman in the audience in the town that she lived in, was like, "Oh, you're going to be, the next big thing. Come to my house. We'll teach you." And she raised money in the town to like get her lessons and da-da-da. So Nina Simone begins her life at a very young age having to practice music, being told she's a genius. She is a genius. And then being kind of taken out of childhood and starts to practice like 6, 7 hours, 8 hours a day after day after day after day. So she doesn't really get a childhood. And she says that it was super isolating for her because she said, When I first began to take lessons, I became terribly aware of how isolated I was from other children and how isolated I was from the white community and the Black community. I felt it all the time. Even when I played with other children, I was asked to play the piano so that they could dance. I wasn't asked too much to do anything else. That was very hard. Part of that isolation was being a Black girl, and I knew about it, and I lived in it. I lived in the South for 17 years. So she's, as a young girl, taken out of her community to go and develop her talent, this like incredible artistic talent and genius. But also it isolates her further within a social context because she's having to just be in the music. And then she's starting to understand the isolation of being a Black person in the United States, in the South, especially at that time. So much of her young life is dominated by these experiences of isolation. And then if you watch like the Netflix movie about her, read her book, her own accounts, she is kind of plagued by the music itself. So as she starts to practice and develop her talents, it's all she can hear is the music. And she hears the music and hears the music and hears the music. And it's kind of like this prison almost of her own genius and of her own talent. And of course, she goes to Juilliard for a couple of years. She's not accepted into another school that she really wants to go to in Philadelphia, the Curtis Institute of Music. And she says that she was turned down because she was Black. And she says that is a jolt of racism that she never gets over. So what happens is she kind of runs out of money from the town, from the kind of, kind of collective foundation, if you will, from the town that she's in that's supporting her talent. And she needs to start to make money. So she wants to be the first Black classical pianist in America. That is her main objective. And once her money runs out, once her schooling isn't, going to be continue, she realizes she has to go to Atlantic City and start playing gigs. And so it's there that she has to start playing more contemporary music. And it's there where she's forced to sing and to use her voice. And then it's there that people are like, oh my God, like your voice is unlike anything I've ever heard. Your talent is immense. And then of course she begins her career. And then what happens is she meets her husband, who was a police chief and happens to be a very controlling, violent man who she also says was the best manager she ever had. And they have this, big love affair. They get married, and he is a manager for her, but he works her into absolute exhaustion. And so her isolation, she's on stage and she's sharing herself with the audience, but her brilliance and her skill and her ability to put that out into the world is immense. But it's also the thing that isolates her. It's also the thing that works her into a type of oblivion. And that is also another signature of Saturn and anything Saturn ruled, is that the hard work of it can become the thing that also kind of takes us down. Now, of course, in the middle of all this, she starts to realize that she's yearning for something more. She didn't get to become a classical pianist, but she has this big career, but she's still not satisfied. And that's when her politics and that's when her kind of revolutionary spirit starts to awaken. And she starts to be very explicit about her politics and her music. And that's another kind of massive stage of her career. So I just think like this way of it being like the ascendant being in Aquarius, Saturn, the ruler of the ascendant, being right there, so dignified, and Pallas Athena being right there as the goddess of wisdom, and her being a literal genius, and also all of the factors of isolation that definitely played into the mental health issues that she would also experience, the racism that she experienced, the exhaustion of overwork that she experienced, and then just the isolation of her genius itself that she experienced would obviously eventually take its toll. But she is a standalone artist. She is unlike anybody before, during, or since.
Yeah. And, it's funny, you mentioned Saturn as bringing that sense of isolation sometimes when we have it prominent in our chart, or when the work itself can be what sets us apart from others. But I would say Pallas Athena has a little bit of that solitude streak as well,
Right.
partly because she didn't partner with anyone, but she's not seen in none of the stories that I know of anyways, she like cavorting with friends.
She's not frolicking.
No, she's dipping in to help heroes here and there, but she's a woman on a mission.
Yes.
She doesn't seem particularly full of joy,
right?
I would say.
Right. She's not a sprite.
No, but with Nina Simone, I think you alluded to this when she was getting into the civil rights movement and the activism there. But I think similar to Audre Lorde, her art, her creativity, her creative intelligence is it was also a weapon. Like she used, was it Mississippi Goddamn, I believe was her first protest song, and I think she maybe contributed others. So there is a way that she was able to use her music to again, to battle against these injustices, to battle against racism and systemic oppression, et cetera. So I think that's
the music festivals she toured in, the ways in which she showed up, and then she obviously eventually also left America.
Right.
There's so much haunting in this chart.
Very,
It's
She's also somebody who's born right before a solar eclipse, so she also has that sun, node conjunction. And so that feeling of there being just like a lot of excitement and tumult and, I don't know, like aggravation in life and disturbing energy, both like you heard when she broke on the scene, it must have disturbed everything around her because it was so different than everything else. But also for her personally, what it did to her, but what it was to carry the burden of that.
Yeah.
Also, Nina Simone's Mercury in Pisces, too.
I know. I was like, we have a theme today.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is that theme? If your inner world is vast and expansive and visionary, you can still be strategic and figure out how to get it across through your own kind of sovereign way. I don't know.
Well, I think the poetry, right? Like Mercury in Pisces being someone who thinks different, who's going against the stream or who goes upstream in some kind of way, but is also going to be captivating in terms of what it is they're creating and articulating. And I do want to also say that on the other side of Pallas Athena in Nina Simone's chart is Venus. So not only does she have the creatrix, the warrior, the wisdom goddess, but she also has the planet of creativity and of art right there with her Saturn. And her Saturn rules over all of that. So this is obviously an incredibly disciplined person who's just got a tremendous amount of creative energy and intellectual ability to do something that is quite stellar as through the vehicle of her body or through the vehicle of her persona herself.
Icon, Queen of Motown. Diana Ross started with the Supremes and then was such a force and changed the culture as the country was changing. I mean, there's so many other things in her chart besides it's like that Leo, Jupiter and all that stuff at the top. But when you look at the palace of it all, it's exactly, Diana Ross has it exactly conjunct her moon.
It's 3 degrees separation.
Yes, it's 13 and 10. And first of all, that's an exalted moon. So there's a lot of moonness here. Diana also was a goddess of the moon. Like Diana is another name for a moon goddess.
Yeah,
and then it's like woven into with like the palace of it all. So it's like it's ruling the ninth. If we think about publishing and like breaking Billboard records and just sort of
worldwide,
yes, huge icon, changed everything. created a model before there was one about what it meant to be a Black star, a woman star, and who's like she breaks away from the Supremes and becomes a solo artist. But I thought this was just like a stunning example of how Pallas is embodied. I'm sure there had to be an incredible amount of strategy to be able to endure. This is a fixed sign, right? So it's like stands the test of time. It's in a Venus ruled sign. And she's got that exalted Venus. So it's just an incredible, really well positioned Pallas. I think we haven't talked a lot about this, but I like it when Pallas and the sign ruler is at least in an aspect to it. It feels like it's playing out in a really supportive way, especially between.
I'd say the
7th
exalted ruler too. The moon is the exalted ruler of Taurus.
Yes,
so
she's got both of them in good spots.
Yeah,
that feels like I'm strategic, but maybe like
you don't love me.
Yeah, the adoration just overfloweth.
Yeah. Okay, so Issa Rae is also an incredible example of when this placement becomes super active. So Issa Rae has Taurus rising. That makes Venus the planet that steers the direction of her life. Venus is in Pisces in the 11th house of friends and groups and audiences. So we already know that part of Issa's journey is to gather with friends, is part of her life purpose is going to be lived out through community, through friends, and through the circles that she feels most connected to. Then she also has Mars sitting right there. So Mars is a planet that is associated with warrior energy. Now it's in Pisces, and Venus is the exalted ruler of Pisces. So it's extra strong. And it's also, I think, softened somewhat because Venus is a planet of beauty and connection and helps us to create bonds with one another. And so the Mars is like, it's still a warrior presence, but it's under one of the auspices it's under is Venus. And Venus is like, okay, but let's also make friends. And so Pallas Athena is right by Issa Rae's Mars. And so it's like a double warrior energy. But again, it's in the style of Pisces, which is about the kind of whole feeling of something. It is a sign that's much more about connection than it is about separating things out and going our own way. So there's I wouldn't say like a total contradiction, but there's, Mars has to figure out a different way to move in Pisces. I always say it's like the surfer. It's like the surfboard kind of like it kind of cuts through, but it's able to ride the waves of the ocean. And it's very like active, but it's part of something bigger. So Pallas Athena gives us a key about Issa Rae's strategy and what it is she's fighting for. And we know that because Venus is co-present and Venus is a ruler of her ascendant and it's exalted, that there's just this like really impactful, important thing that happens through friends, with friends, and for community. So Issa Rae has a strategy that breaks through an industry that is known for being a fortress. So on YouTube, she has the series Awkward Black Girl, and that catches the attention of the powers that be. It ends up becoming the show that is a massive hit, Insecure. Now, there's a couple different ways we can look at this. Insecure is a love letter to her best friends. It is a love letter to Black female friendship. It is a love letter to LA, to her local community. It is a love letter to all the people that make up LA. It is a love letter to Black-owned fashion brands and musicians, because everything mostly that everybody wears, the music that gets played, is all about supporting community. And of course, one of her main strategies is to come up together, is to have a kind of communal network of people that rise up together. It's part of how she was able to break the fortress of Hollywood, because she played so well to the audiences on YouTube. But then it's also something that she demonstrates both on camera and behind the camera in terms of facilitating more and more openings for people that she is alongside, instead of thinking about like a top-down approach, like, oh, I have to appease the most powerful person up there. She's like, no, my strategy is horizontal. My strategy is that we all come up together. And that's so Venus, the planet of justice, in the 11th house, the place of like, these are my friends. And these are the friends I roll with. These are the friends I'm going to move with. These are the friends that are going to come to the club with me. These are the friends that are going to come to work with me. These are the friends that I'm going to make stuff with. And so I just thought it was a beautiful example of how we become a warrior, or how we use that kind of warrior strategic energy to build further bonds with each other and to also open things up for one another.
Yeah, I love that. And that being part of the strategy, like that being part of one of the secrets to success. I wanted to say this earlier and I didn't get to it, but there is a distinction between Athena and Mars. They're both war gods.
Thank you.
In a sense. But Mars is like brute force, raw aggression. And Athena is that more cunning, wise, and possibly restrained energy that will time her anger accordingly, or the release of whatever action she's going to take, depending on when it's most strategic to do so, and not necessarily on whatever emotions are like bubbling up initially. So I love what you're saying here in terms of how she's, how community has been so much a part of her own rise to power. But I think it's also just like, it worked better that way. It was more strategic. It makes sense that we, support the people around us, and that can lead to our success, even though that's not the main narrative that society tells us.
But also that Mars is kind of harnessed or sandwiched between Venus, the planet of connection, and Pallas Athena, the goddess that's a little bit more like, hey, let's harness this a little bit.
Yeah.
The edge gets softened.
Or it becomes less detectable.
Yeah.
Like you can be underrated and have that also work for you, I think.
For sure,
like, okay, underestimate me. Go ahead. Let's see.
Yeah.
I love that. Let's move on to Miley. Miley Cyrus has Pallas exactly conjunct Venus in Capricorn in the 9th house. You know what I was thinking a lot about with this placement? This might be indirect, but like being sprouted from the father's head, and like her father is
oh my God,
Ray Cyrus, and was established in the music industry, and like that's how she came to be. At first she was just his daughter, but now she's like overcome him. The prophecy came true.
Yes.
Nobody knows who her dad is.
That's right.
It's just Miley.
Gen Z have no idea. Yes. Yes, we love it.
So I thought that was like a quick, funny one. There's a couple more things.
And it's really important that her Venus is the ruler of her ascendant, and Athena's right there. So like her fighting spirit, I think, is something that you really feel when you watch her career, when you see her triumphs, when you understand also the longevity of her career, her hardworkingness, all of that.
She came in like a wrecking ball.
Listen.
That's what I was about to say. I was about to say that.
Take it.
I heard an interview with her recently, and I mean, you didn't need to listen to an interview to suspect this, but she is super ambitious. Like she has big plans. I think she feels or has felt a little like she hasn't been given the recognition that she deserves. And I'm just thinking about that Capricorn placement. Pallas Athena is ambitious any way you go about it, but in Capricorn especially so, and especially when it comes to, I think, material results. And again, the 9th house being having this worldwide effect, this global impact potential. So that feels really clear. And Venus, like you mentioned before, Chani, being one of the planets we most associate with creativity and with art and art making, not to mention beauty and being an idol of sorts. So that just feels very literal.
Right.
Her
like
hit
it will
song
as she gets older.
Flowers after her divorce is so doing the Pallas, Venus, and Capricorn of like, I can buy my own flowers. I can hold my own hand.
Yeah, very virgin goddess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Love it.
And that was like a huge
it.
hit for her. So I like that embodiment.
It's a great
in
song.
her art.
Maybe we should segue to Britney Spears while we're
Let's
on
do it. Spears.
pop artists.
Yeah.
Spears.
Spears.
I didn't
You just got
even
that?
think about that.
Same.
Oh my God.
Oh, how
Okay.
the archetypes archetype.
I forget if I even said this before, but the name Pallas comes from the Greek word palo for spear brandishing. So literally it's like she has Pallas in her name.
It's like she has Pallas in her name.
And she has Pallas within 3 degrees of her ascendant. So
Which is
again,
her.
the ascendant, which is her ascendant. The ascendant is the most specific point of the chart to you. It represents yourself. It represents your physical body, your vitality, your identity. And it's so specific to you because it's calculated by the minute and like the latitudinal and longitudinal degrees of your birth. So it's really, really, really specific to you. And as I just said, Pallas is right there. So again, she's another, we've had a few Pallas first house conjunct the ascendant examples. And so she's another person who's embodying this. And again, we have some daddy issues here. So as I'm sure everyone here is aware, Britney Spears, the so-called Princess of Pop, she started gaining fame as a child celebrity, I believe, after her time on the Mickey Mouse Club with Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, and others. And she, I grew up listening to Britney Spears. This was my era. Hit me baby one more time, etc. But after 2008, she was placed under a controversial conservatorship to attempt to improve her mental health. So a conservatorship is when a court appoints someone to manage the financial or personal affairs of another person who is deemed unable to do so themselves. And who was the conservator but her father, famously, and her attorney. So I feel like the image I had here as I was thinking about this was like Zeus trying to squash Pallas Athena back into his skull, like just trying to kind of re-swallow her. The father, Britney's dad, was literally kind of keeping her into a bit of a prison, like not letting her be free to just run her own life. This was without her consent. She shared later that she experienced abuse, coercion, and mistreatment. And she actually stops touring in the late 2000s to focus on challenging the conservatorship, I think in court. Eventually, there's a whole social movement that builds around this, the hashtag Free Britney, which attracts worldwide attention. And she ends up making a statement kind of saying she's not, like, she wants to terminate her conservatorship in 2021. And eventually it ends up being terminated later that year. So there are a few themes here. There's the daddy issues, her dad trying to confine her, but also just the court battles and like fighting for her freedom.
Yeah. Incredible. Wow. Stunning. Oof. Okay, let's go to Tina Turner because it's another rock star and it is also another person that has Pallas Athena, at least in the first house. It's not conjunct her ascendant, but it's in the first house. So it's also conjunct Pluto, which is one of those planets that defines a generation. And so it's not like the wildest thing to have Pallas Athena conjunct Pluto, but it's in the first house. And so this feels like especially important. So as we all know, Tina Turner is one of the greatest entertainers, rock stars of all time. She also, of course, if we want to talk about how we start to connect themes of being a warrior goddess with underworld journeys of Pluto, and the abuses of power and the just straight, underlying abuse that Pluto can also symbolize. Tina Turner gives us one of the more important at the time kind of statements about intimate partner violence when she obviously lived through a tremendous amount of it at the hands of her partner. And then when she leaves him, she leaves everything behind except for her name. And then she invents herself. So when we have Pluto in a really prominent part of our chart, especially the first house, there might need to be these kind of moments of personal reinvention, of a personal coming down into the bowels of hell and then, rebirthing ourselves back up.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's got that kind of baked into her life story, but she also, through the movie, What's Love Got to Do with It, she gives us this really raw, intimate, very generous kind of portrayal. She lets us into her life. And, as somebody who grew up with a lot of different Ike and Tina stories in my own personal life, it was like one of those moments of contextualizing what it was that was so kind of all pervasive in my childhood. And I think that movie left such a mark on people because it is about her ability to come back and to be one of the most successful, like stadium playing rock stars of all times, right? She has some of the biggest audiences, I think, of a female rock artist ever, but she has some of the biggest audiences ever, especially at the time that she was having them. And so there is this kind of like reemergence and this like warrior kind of nature that she brings through with her. Plus she is, physically somebody who she just danced and danced and danced for decades and decades and decades in high heels. Like her personal kind of like warrior stamina was, I think, unparalleled. I don't understand how her hips dealt with heels and dancing for that long, but she did it. She is, there's some like kind of goddess like energy that comes through her when she's on stage. But when we look at like one of the movies that she did, she was in Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome. And if you want to talk about a helmet and a mohawk, when you see the visuals of it, she literally, at least the first front of her hair is lifted up in a mohawk. And then of course, as she gets into her later part of her career, she is, wearing wigs that are quite like spiky and lifted up. Not that they're helmets in and of themselves, but there is this kind of like big warrior energy that I think she kind of moves into the world with.
Yeah.
And so her story, I think she said quite often, especially in the last documentary that they made about her that she made, is that she did not want to be equated with that time in her life and what it meant to have had to survive that. But I would say that is one of the pieces of her legacy. And there is something very intrinsic about being a survivor and being a warrior. And that those two kind of archetypes that she lived and expressed really kind of in obvious kind of ways.
Yeah, that's another stunning example. And I do feel like I want to highlight what you said about Pluto being generational, and because Pluto moves so slowly that it does. When we think of different generations, they often coincide with a specific Pluto placement. So like millennials being Pluto in Scorpio, Gen Z being Pluto in Sag, Gen X being Pluto in Libra, et cetera, et cetera. Boomers, Pluto in Leo. But when I think of Tina Turner, it's just like how memorable she is for generations and generations and generations. I actually had to Google. I had no idea she was born in 1939.
Right.
I, for some reason, thought she was much younger than that. I was like, wait, is that correct?
Because she was in her 80s when she died.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But that just, I think, is a testament to how, to her legacy and how long lasting and like the generational impact she's had.
Right. And I guess I don't know if I said this so clearly, but I think she was the first person in her generation to be so overt about what had happened to her in such a public way. And then in terms of like being a warrior, here's a quote from her that I think really is a testament to that. My legacy is that I stayed on course from the beginning to the end because I believed in something inside of me.
I have chills. That's so moving. I feel like we're talking about this a lot, but I love this idea of Pallas also being like where your talents are, like your toolkit that you can take with her, like this idea of rebuilding oneself, but you always maintain those things that are within you to do. And in that Leo way, it's like kind of being on stage. It's like, that sort of that power, that larger than life, that just becomes a sensation as like one of her Pallas in her toolkits. I like that for Tina.
Yeah.
So Lucy Lawless is just a stunning example only
Xena.
because it's the warrior princess. And before she was Xena, she literally played an Amazon warrior in what's it called? Hercules.
Oh my God.
It was called
it was a spinoff. She was a spinoff from the show.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So before Xena, she starred in Hercules and the Amazon Women.
Okay.
And she played a man-hating Amazon named Lucia.
Amazing.
So what I said before about Pallas being literally an Amazon.
Yes.
And they ended up loving her character so much that they made her Xena, the warrior princess.
Wow.
And here was another really special tidbit is that when Xena, the warrior princess started in September 1995, Lucy Lawless was actually starting her Pallas return. So Pallas had just entered Virgo. It wasn't at that degree yet, but it was just beginning her Pallas return, which happens every 5 years or so.
Wow.
So I just thought that was a cute example. So again, like with Tina Turner, she is Pallas within a few degrees of Pluto. And again, she was like the warrior princess for
that generation. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's in her sixth house of work and jobs and employ. Like,
yes.
Literally, Pallas Athena was like, you're going to be me.
Her day job.
Yeah. This is your day job.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is part of the skill you have to work with, which I think is an interesting thing for people to think about. Just looking at the house that your Pallas Athena is in can tell you so much about where you can access this strategic, creative intelligence and the power of it. And I think, like I said before, and it took me a while to understand how that showed up in my life, even though I think it's really obvious. If I was to, I will tell you, my Pallas Athena is conjunct my midheaven, like within 3 degrees. So I have to show up in the world like that. Otherwise, I won't feel fully expressed. I won't feel like I'm doing my job. Like part of my job is to, as a human, I feel like, is to be engaged in the fight about something. And so it can be easier to see like your Pallas Athena if it's connected to a point or a planet in your chart, but it's also in my, 10th house. And so it has to be part of my job. And then all of the challenging parts about having that so prominent in my chart are also true. I have to be like, Chani, what are you fighting about? Like, what is this the thing to fight about? Like, slow down, calm down. I have to, because it's so prominent in my chart, I have to be able to kind of understand where it's not useful and where it is useful. So for me to do or be a part of some kind of activism is an absolute like outlet for me for that part of my energy. So when you go into the Chani app and you look at the Me tab and you figure out where it is, know that that house in your chart is a big clue as to where you can let out some of this warrior.
Battle queen.
Yes, battle queen energy, where it will help you to do some good. Because if it's functioning there unconsciously, it can actually kind of like backfire a little bit, I think.
Yes. I think I've seen that. I wasn't talking about you, but I think I've seen that. I've seen that in other.
I am.
But I like, it's just funny that you created an app with your name on it that has Pallas exactly on the ascendant.
You know what I mean?
She's trolling you a little bit.
Totally. Totally. And she's up at my midheaven. So there's a definite connection there. Okay. What else would you say? Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask Thea if that's where she is for you too, because you alluded to it being in your work.
Pallas is in my 10th.
Love it.
Yeah. So I like this. Leaning into that battle energy and also knowing it's I see it as being expressed, sometimes embodied by other people. But I also like when you're close to people in body, you also have like like a thing too. It's like you, but others. And I think in Gemini, it usually gives me two fierce women, bosses, which would be Chani and Sonia, who fight for stuff.
In this iteration, you've had other, right?
And this one, at this iteration. And so I love seeing, I'm like, that's kind of cute.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like seeing where it shows up in the houses for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have it, like, say, in the second house, part of what you do to make a living might be about advocating for other people. There might be something that you fight for. There might be something, you might be some sort of like marketing strategist, or you might have strategy in your title in terms of work. Or if you have it, let's say, in your fifth house, maybe you have kids that outsmart you all the time. Or maybe you are like a crafty queen. Like maybe you do a million different types of crafts, or have a love for like sports strategy. Like if you think about the fifth house as being like joy and fun and play and pleasure, then that's where the strategist is. And strategy, it's obviously present in most games where there's more than one person. So chess, basketball, like anything like that could be a really great outlet for your creative energy.
Yeah. So people listening, that's where you go to the Chani app and you can find out which house and sign it's in for you. And there'll be a reading that expresses where in your life that need to be strategic, that tendency to be a battle queen might come out.
And then in terms of signs, what would you say? Like, how do people understand what sign?
I think it
beyond
just
what we've already written.
Yeah,
hopefully what we wrote helps you, but just to think
I think
about
it colors the expression. Like we've seen, you already gave examples of this, but off the top of my head, for example, the expression in Audre Lorde's chart and no, this wasn't Nina's, but Audre Lorde's chart, having it in Pisces, comes out through poetry, like poetry being the weapon. That's very Piscean. Pisces, has time for poetry. Aries doesn't so much. With Aries, I feel like it might be even sharper around the edges potentially, or more direct, more decisive, more like
act without thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. With Britney, it was in Libra. And I mean, she was a beautiful woman. That was partly, I think, what made her so commercially successful. There is some, I don't want to say all Librans are, I don't know. There's not necessarily a connection between, no, there is. Libra is a sign that is associated with beauty because it's ruled by Venus.
Yeah. And being pleasing to other people, which can
as a strategy.
Be a weapon used against you as well. Yeah. But it's also a strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are, it'll just flavor or filter the expression of how that battle queen comes to play.
And then we've also included descriptions in the app of if your Pallas Athena is conjunct a planet or a point in the chart as well. And so that'll add an extra kind of layer of information.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this yet, but for all the asteroid goddesses, the asteroids it's similar to Black Moon Lilith. They are subtle points, and they will probably be the most prominent if they are in one of your angular houses. So in the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th house, especially the 1st and the 10th, but also if it's conjunct a personal planet like the sun or Mercury, like we saw in some of the examples, Venus, etc. But even if it's not for you, it still will come through. Like we saw, Lucy Lawless, it's conjunct Pluto, but Pluto is, she had the same Pluto placement as everyone born within a few years of her. But it came through her daily work. So it'll still express itself in a certain way in a given area of your life.
So not only do you have a reading for you written by human beings, actual astrologers, not AI, in the Chani app about where Pallas Athena is, what sign it's in, if it's connected to any other planets in your chart. Not only that, you also have Pallas Athena in the transit section of the app. So we will tell you if the asteroid right now is making any aspects to any other planets in your chart in this current moment. which is really fascinating because you could have a planet that's kind of like a little bit more docile, a little bit more calm, or like not really into engaging in battle. And when you have the transit of Pallas Athena go over that planet, it could awaken something in that planet, in that part of your life. And in terms of how you could, work with that archetype to do some really good kind of like motivational work in your life. So we've got all of that. And then we've also got a meditation and a sleep story. Is that true? Did I do that?
Yeah. Yes.
I did a meditation. I did that. Okay.
Oh,
we did that.
The sleep story. I don't know about the meditation.
I did the meditation. I did it. Okay. So Eliza, you wrote the Pallas Athena sleep story. I recorded it. So that's like our Pallas and our Athena came together. Our Medusa and our Athena came together. So we've got a sleep story. We've got a meditation for you. And we are the only astrology app that has Pallas Athena in it. So we welcome the goddess humbly, and we hope that she accepts our invitation to both come into our life and come into your life so that you can work with it. And I don't know if this needs to be said, but we felt like obviously we need to unleash the warrior goddess out into the world or be part of her unleashing, because this is a time where we need to be exceptionally strategic, exceptionally courageous and brave and determined to
and wise.
Win and wise. Thank you.
And that's how we do battle.
That's how we do battle.
Yes. What was our band name again?
The female
rage gaze.
Rage gaze. Female rage gaze. Coming to a theater near you. Town. Bar,
a device near you.
Something. A device. Yes. That's the other name for this release of the app. All right. Thank you. This was fascinating. I learned so much. Thank you both for venturing into this territory with me and us and the app. And I don't know, it's like you just want to go and look up everybody's chart and see where Pallas Athena is.
And people can.
And people
can.
You can. All right. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.